Shut up and sit down.
I am a radical libertarian.
And we don't want the government to do a damn thing.
The current state of politics is unsustainable, politically, economically.
You deserve better.
It is about supporting, platforming, and assisting the people who are out here actually doing the fight.
You just take an issue that's important to you and do something.
There you go.
You are part of that declaration against tyranny.
Because no one brings tear gas to a gunfight.
This conversation gives me a little more hope for the future.
The one, the only.
Fight for liberty. This is the cherry on top.
This is FSM.
Hello, everyone. And welcome back to the Fight for Liberty. I am your host, David Fite, here to get you fired up about the men and women out here making the world a freer place through politics, activism, journalism, and more. We are coming at you live from Free Speech Media Network, bringing you the stories, conversations, and events that the old corporate media just won't. And it's our mission here on the show to give you some hope for the movement and the future while providing some actionable advice and inspiring stories that help you get out there and fight for liberty yourself. If you're watching this on YouTube, do us a favor, click the link in the description, go on over to the Rumble. They pay their creators better over there, and they're less likely to shut us down for bringing you the unfiltered truth. We're also on X and a couple of other platforms that are starting to get a little bit better, but we stream to YouTube still just because it exists. Tonight's show, we're going to be talking a lot about that unfiltered truth and with an amazing guest, formerly from the teams of BitChute and Parlor, onto some other awesome stuff that we'll talk about. But first, we're going to do just a really quick sponsorship bit from somebody I am super excited to talk to you guys about. LibertyCon International is going to be in Washington, D.C. next weekend, February 7th through the 8th. Join some of the greatest heroes for liberty all under one roof at the DC Downtown Westin Hotel. We're going to have awesome speakers like Daryl Davis, Mark Pellegrino, Glenn Kane Jacobs, Spike Cohen, John Mackey, Corey DeAngelis. I'm hosting an awesome panel that I'm super excited about. Definitely, if you're anywhere near DC or you don't have anything going on next weekend and you can get up there, come to this event. It is going to be super awesome. And you can get your tickets at LibertyCon.com. If you use the code FIGHT at checkout, it'll get you half off. And if you can't make it there, everything will be streaming on Civil.com and all of their apps. So definitely check them out. Check out LibertyCon. It's going to be a really awesome time. And everything that's going on the main stage will be streamed live, like I said, to Civil. So definitely check them both out. And I hope to be able to see you in DC, because it is going to be a great time. But without further ado, joining the fight tonight, we have the former Chief Policy Officer from BitChute and Parlor, as I mentioned, now a Litigation Fellow at the Pacific Legal Foundation, the one and only Amy Peikoff. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, David. How are you?
I am doing pretty good. It's been a crazy day, but we're here. And it's all starting to smooth back out. Thank you so much for coming on.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks for the nice intro there.
Yeah. So we always like to start off with a little bit of a testimonial type question. So tell me, when did you first hear the ideals of liberty and what kind of attracted you to that?
Wow. I would say that they were implicit probably in a lot of the things that I read even as a younger kid. Some of the frontier stories of the Wilder families and all those, I think, those are compatible, right?
Yeah.
But explicitly, I was assigned the Fountainhead in high school. I was, I don't know if I should admit this, but I think it was the first year of the Fountainhead essay contest that the Ayn Rand Institute ran. And my high school English teacher was not an objectivist or anything. He was just very keen on getting his students prepared for college. And of course, they were offering a scholarship for the winners of the essay contest, et cetera. And so he went ahead and assigned this thing. And I think I wrote a pretty terrible essay for that contest because I thought I was very clever. I thought that I could say, well, certainly if you read The Fountainhead, you must identify with Howard Rourke. Everybody does. And so how is it that they say that there's this battle between individualism and collectivism when everybody who reads this book, of course, is going to identify with it? So I wrote this essay that was really ignorant. And then after everybody turned their essays in, we had class discussion in my high school English class. And I found out that not everybody really liked Howard Rourke that much. Not even among idealistic high school kids. And that was a bit of my awakening that there actually was an issue here. And maybe I needed to get out of my own head and realize what was going on out in the world a little. Yeah.
Nice. I love that. There are so many good books out there to kind of introduce people to these concepts, and it's always fun to hear which ones were kind of the final straw that brought them in. I don't think I've ever heard Little House on the Prairie as one of them, but it really does make sense. My sister was really into those books growing up, and a lot of the stuff that I remember her talking about them that checks out for sure. And I was similarly into the Davy Crockett kind of, the boy version of that kind of stuff. So yeah,
I hadn't really thought of it before until you asked me the question, but I was saying, okay, there was some implicit preparation in my background to kind of get me ready for The Fountainhead when I did encounter it. So
yeah. I like it. So let's go through a little bit of the resume a little bit, because you've got some pretty cool things on there. So Parlor came first, right?
Yeah, I mean, before all that, I was an academic.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, taught at the Air Force Academy and everything. It was quite interesting. Taught in law schools and did a lot of research on privacy. And so what had happened after I ended up leaving the law school, I started this little thing called the Center for Legalization of Privacy, specifically to write an amicus brief in United States versus Facebook. And I don't know if you know what that case was. It was 2019, and it was the second consent order that was going to be between the FTC and Facebook. And I had already had on my radar the first one, because I was very concerned that the FTC was, in effect, regulating social media through consent order. And that it was, of course, by complaining about Facebook's privacy practices, which may or may not have run afoul of some, rights of their users. The remedy in my mind was not to give a government agency total control over Facebook and their privacy practices, right? I mean, if there was actually a rights violation of the users, then Facebook should pay the users some money, or that's the form of the remedy. But instead, the FTC just kind of takes control of certain aspects of the business for 20 years or more, or whatever. This was the second such order. And when I read it, I was, struck that it seemed the consent order would grant warrantless access to Facebook user data to both the FTC and the DOJ. And that concerned me. And I knew that part of the pretense for them thinking that this is constitutional and okay for them to do was something called the third party doctrine, which is something that I had written about and that I had a solution ready for, and I wanted to get it before courts. So that was my whole thing. So I wrote this brief, and it turned out that the district court judge in DC who was hearing the case, he made Facebook and the FTC respond to all the arguments in all the amicus briefs. So EFF, who's been doing this forever, and they write their great briefs and everything. Yes, of course, they have to be responded to, but I also had to be responded to. And that was very interesting, because on the one hand, the FTC says, no, we can get all the data because of the third party doctrine. You're crazy. And Facebook says, oh, no, they can't get the data because the Stored Communications Act is going to protect the users. And of course, the Stored Communications Act is just a statute, and it doesn't require probable cause and particularized suspicion. It's not constitutional protection of your data. And so just the disparity in the responses that I got to my arguments sort of showed the problem. And I was hopeful that the judge would see this and maybe he would not allow this consent order to go through. But it was rubber stamped in April of 2020 when everybody was distracted by COVID. So that was it. Yes, I got them to respond. Yes, I got them to show that basically Facebook thought your data might be protected. And
the government,
the government, yeah, it said, no, we get it. What are you talking about? We get that data because of the third party doctrine. But anyway, so what happened was this strategic investor in Parlor read the brief. And that's how I got you. You were wondering, you're like, why is she telling me this story? No, but I'm telling you this story because, interestingly enough, he read the brief, and that's how, through a few steps, I got involved in Parlor.
Nice. That is a fun way to get brought in.
It is
showing up the competition is a nice way to catch the eyes of somebody in charge of a company.
Well, and they were privacy oriented too. At least that that was the idea at that point.
So and then from there you made the jump to BitChute a couple of years later, right?
Yeah. So with Parlor, first there was the unjust scapegoating and deplatforming in January of 2021. And so the platform was effectively offline, off the app stores for a few months. And that was just enough time for Getter and Truth Social to come into the picture. And after that, it was pretty hard to compete even within that alt space.
Yeah.
And then the nail in the coffin, so to speak, was Elon Musk buying Twitter. And so everybody thought, well, why do you need these alt free speech platforms when X itself is going to be the free speech platform? Moreover, I wasn't very much in agreement with some of the things that George Farmer, the second CEO of Parler, was doing. There was a billboard in Times Square, which was quite a expense.
I remember
before
that.
A product was even ready, and then of course there was the surprise that I got in all hands one day that they were going to try to sell the platform to Ye, Kanye West. Yeah. So Kanye West could have been my boss at one point. That ended up falling through, but then he was scrambling, I guess, to find another buyer that was going to keep it running, and wasn't able to do that. So it got shut down, and that's when I made the jump over to BitChute.
Nice. I've definitely been on. I've been on both platforms off and on. I definitely was one of those non-adopters, the problem people of this for a long time. Like I still have Facebook. I still am on YouTube. I use both of them a lot less. Like you heard at the beginning, every episode I try to push people off of the YouTube stream onto something better, but it's still there. And BitChute is one of them that I have an account on that I have just kind of uploaded very sporadically to. And but I am a huge fan of the mission, obviously, of trying to get off of some of these extremely government controlled, extremely censorship heavy, extremely privacy lacking platforms.
Yes.
I'm curious, especially having experience with a few of the different platforms that have all been in the same space. Why do you think that they get the super toxic labels that they do, like within days of existence. You know, it's like it's a Nazi haven, it's alt-right, it's all of this other stuff. It's like before there's even a possibility for there to be that much of a skew of content on a site. You know, the first time I went on BitChute, the homepage was all like how to repair a cell phone videos. It wasn't Nazi stuff. It was like old like 2005 YouTube home screen, and it was awesome. It was one of my favorite things when it first was kind of a thing, because it was a step back to the beginning where it wasn't these super overproduced BS things that are what most of YouTube is now. It was back to just like people uploading stuff on their phone and like how-tos and cool stuff. And same with Rumble has some of that, and now they're kind of moving into that super produced stuff as well. But it was nice, that kind of return to normalcy in my mind of like what the internet kind of used to look like. But I was getting told like, oh, how could you possibly go on there? You're a terrible person.
Wow.
Curious from your side of things, is there any like legitimacy to the claim, and how did you have to kind of work around that in your capacity?
Well, I mean, to the extent that certain types of content is completely excluded from other platforms, then it's going to find its way to platforms that actually allow it. But I mean, if you back up, I think a lot of the problem of this content in the first place was the engagement enhancing algorithms and sort of, getting people, I watched an entire, it was like a 2-hour interview. I think the podcaster is called Diary of a CEO or something. Anyway, he interviewed the woman who wrote Dopamine Nation, and I can't remember her name right now, but talking about these, the devices themselves, the apps that are on them, particularly the social media apps, as being very manipulative of your dopamine, right? And so there's these engagement enhancing algorithms. The thing that they really get you excited about is something that you're maybe very angry about or whatever. So I actually think that a lot of the extreme content was almost sort of excited or generated or enabled by these algorithms, right? And then what do they do? What do the platforms do when they start seeing a lot of this hateful content or whatever? They decide that they're going to just censor it or remove it, and that doesn't solve the problem ever, right? Why not just say, okay? I mean, I actually think the problem is the algorithms, and that if they were to just give people a chronological feed, or just give people what they asked for, you have a subscribe feed on, on BitChute. If you have a subscribe feed, it's what you've subscribed to, right? Imagine. And you do actually have the following feed on X now that you can choose versus the For You, etc. And I think that's a lot healthier. But nobody wants to touch those algorithms, and instead they would rather censor or de-emphasize, throttle the byproducts of the algorithms, the undesirable byproducts of the algorithms. And then what do? You have people going to these other platforms, and they just put the content there, etc. I mean, what is the answer to that content really, right? You could say, oh, well, don't go there because there's all that content. But I think by actually allowing the content to be aired and then answered by people, what's the remedy for bad speech? It's more speech. Unless it's actually inciting violence, then I say, I think the remedy is really just to have more of it. And I don't believe, that BitChute or these platforms, that it's all Nazi content or anything like that.
Yeah, I think there's also this weird habit of echo chambering into an area. So, you've got the mass exodus off of X onto Blue Sky now, and a couple of other things, and all of these people that it's like they're trying to make X a completely like right wing only, bordering on alt right space. Because if every reasonable person leaves, then that's all that's left. Right? Obviously, not every
Yeah.
reasonable person is anywhere as close from leaving, and most of the people that have left that I've seen so far, nobody's missing. But that's beside the point. If you don't want a platform to be all of that kind of content, then people need to be producing other content on that, and you can't be shaming people for trying to balance it back out. I
I
think
mean,
that's
on
a
Parlor,
silly
we
way
would
to.
have people, who were liberals who would come over and argue with everybody else.
Mhm.
And it seems like it would be the perfect place if you wanted to try to change some minds, that you would come and do that. Of course, it was true that Parlor at the time was predominantly conservatives or right wing or whatever you want to call.
Yeah.
None of these labels are that accurate anymore, I don't think, especially what we've seen with the Trump administration being an amalgam of people who were formerly Democrats and everything else. It's
Yeah.
hard to stick to these labels anymore. But the people who were excluded, whose viewpoints were excluded the most from the other platforms, would of course naturally be the early adopters over at Parlor.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you wanted to go there and argue with some and troll them, yeah, we had people coming over and doing that.
Yeah. I have a couple of some of my like actually borderline alt-right friends and acquaintances have Blue Sky accounts, and that's what they do. They
Oh
spend
wow.
their spare time going over there and just seeing how many people they can piss off. I had a group of 3 of my friends literally had a race to see who could get banned first.
And did they get banned on Blue
all
Sky?
all 3 of them within 2 days.
Oh wow. Oh
They're
wow. I
very
thought Blue
quick.
Sky was sort of free speech oriented, no?
They supposedly are, and then there's, from what I understand, I do have an account there, but I'm not over there very much. From what I understand, there very few rules, but strict on the rules that exist. So if you
Okay.
can be like seen as inciting violence or like specifically like harassment of some person in like a racial way or so, if it's directed at another user, I think it's different than just kind of posting something, like statistics or something like that is
Right.
one thing, but calling somebody a slur is a little bit different. And I think that they have some rules that are a little bit laxer than your average platform, but they're still pretty quick to ban people if they do get enough reports. Is what I'm hearing. I go over there and I post like the show promo every
Sure.
week, but that's about it.
Do you get much traction from it?
Not too much. I
Okay.
made the account within the first 2 weeks of the platform existing, and so that first couple of days there was a bunch of people that would just follow back anybody and just would go through and follow just random everyone, because there's only
Right.
a couple hundred people on the platform, maybe a couple thousand. But now it's kind of it's grown into an actual platform now, so you don't get that niche like I was one of the first kind of credibility anymore. And so it's maybe 4 or 5 people that follow me consistently over there that used to follow me on Twitter and just don't use Twitter anymore. But at least those couple of people that went on that exodus can still keep up on who's on the show, and they'll come back to either YouTube or Rumble or whatever to watch it. But it's an interesting platform from what I've seen. But I would much rather be on whatever platform has the most users, of the most opinions. I want people to
Yes.
challenge what I have to
Yes.
say. I say
Yeah.
some dumb stuff sometimes. You should argue with me every once in a while.
You would want the widest range of viewpoints, and
Mhm.
you would want the most open, most tolerant policy to allow all of those to be aired and expressed and challenged and worked through and everything else. And normatively, I think modeling your policy on the First Amendment is the right thing to do. Now, do I think that legally platforms should be required to be modeled on the First Amendment, which is something that some, conservatives in Florida and Texas, they tried to mandate something like this, right? And it got struck down, and I think that's right. I think that, these are private companies. As long as they are making the decisions as private companies, which sometimes wasn't true, right? We saw that with the Twitter files. But as long as they're making the decisions as private companies, they should be able to, have algorithms and filters and throttle this and shadow ban that and whatever. I don't think that they should be able to be fraudulent in representing what they do. But normatively, I think a platform like X really should model as closely on the First Amendment as possible, consistent with business practices, everything else. But, one nuance that we got into, we were talking about modeling our policies on the First Amendment at Parlor, was freedom of association is part of the First Amendment, right?
Yes.
So you give individuals mute features and block features so that they can curate their feeds for themselves. You can even give them, and I think that X is now doing this, we used to do this, that people could ban the term pineapple pizza or whatever from their feed if they wanted to, right? So you curate your own feed, and that's freedom of association, right? Some people would say, oh, you're censoring me or whatever. It's like, no, I'm deciding whether I want to associate with you or not. If I block you or mute you or do whatever, take advantage of those tools. You could even give people a so-called hate speech filter. We could talk about what a proper hate speech filter would actually do. But you can give them one of those, and they can choose to do that for themselves, but then make it an individual choice. And of course, moreover, if you have advertisers on the platform, advertisers also have freedom of association. So they should be able to, especially with today's technology, be able to say, okay, I don't want to appear next to this type of content, and I do want to appear next to the other type of content. That's not censorship either, So I think all of those things are consistent with a platform that is as normatively proper, modeled their policies on the First Amendment.
Yeah, and I'm definitely with you that that shouldn't be mandated by the government.
No.
For sure. The closest thing I could concede to in that would be some sort of a anti-fraud. If there's some amount of fraud, like with Elon demonetizing a bunch of people last month, there was some talk of that, and I don't think that he actually committed fraud in that circumstance. But if somewhere in the monetization contract there's a clause that says that you're going to be given a reason or a notice or something that he didn't do, then he already, that's a breach of contract, and that already is a problem. You don't have to overregulate.
Breach of contract, fraud, these are all common law tools, civil law tools that already exist, right? And I could see you, and I think I read that you're an anarchist completely, but I'm not. I actually think that there's a place for courts and police and military, right? But you might also see that there is a reason to have an agency that is an expert in trying to untangle the sorts of specific types of fraud. What is fraud within this context? One question that really has interested me, and particularly when, I'm forgetting her name now, but the woman who was the Facebook whistleblower who was talking about all the problems with the algorithms. If you remember her name, let me know. But I forgot.
I'll look it up.
It's been a while. In any event, one solution really is to look at the question whether people actually meaningfully consent to being manipulated by these algorithms, particularly children, right? Because her testimony, Howie or some H-A-U. I can't. Anyway,
It's Frances Haugen.
yeah. So I got almost there. I was almost there.
Yeah.
Anyway, she was specifically talking about teenage girls, minors, and minors, as you know, can't actually consent and make contracts until they're 18 years old. You know, why can we say that they can meaningfully consent in any way to be manipulated by mysterious algorithms that most people don't even understand? And it's really interesting because, I mean, once you watch a 2-hour podcast discussing how dopamine is manipulated and that your drug of choice might be social media, and that might be the thing that you are actually, distorting your dopamine mechanism with, even if you understand that, you might still have a hard time resisting it. Yes.
Yeah. I understand that, and I have a hard time resisting it still.
Yeah. Yeah.
Twitter is an addictive thing sometimes, especially when you have something that actually goes off more than your average thing, and your notifications are just blowing up all day, and that dopamine is, at tippy top.
I actually wonder how Elon Musk is as productive as he is. I've heard some things about what his management strategy is, because he's got all these different companies going, and then he goes and visits and he solves the problem, that's the one that nobody can solve, and that's what he focuses on when he visits, and then he goes to the next one, etc. But still, he's on Twitter so much, and he's doing so much with politics and everything else. I just don't know how he does it. I don't.
Yeah, I have managed quite a few people's social medias, either volunteer or professionally, and because they can't do it themselves, and they're just running for city council somewhere, or a congressional candidate or something like that, or a small business that just can't manage fixing the cars and posting on Facebook once or twice a week as a auto body shop or something. I couldn't imagine sending rockets to Mars while also tweeting more than anyone else I follow.
Yes. It's really incredible. The guy is
I think he
amazing.
also just has no filter. That has to help. The autism, just word vomit out into the ether, I think helps. I would be too nervous to say
for word vomit, he's doing pretty well. I can tell you that. So
fair.
Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I am interested to see Twitter kind of come back from what it was. To your point earlier about the Twitter files, I think is a really important thing to mention with as far as censorship and freedom of speech goes. So it shouldn't be mandated if it's a free organization, but if the government is trying to get involved in that kind of a way, it's a whole different thing. I just went back and found out that one of my old episodes got pulled down from YouTube just very quietly. I didn't even get a notification about it or anything like that.
That's weird. Huh.
Yeah, unless it might be buried somewhere. I'm sure I got an email that just got buried in a few of the other emails from YouTube, but I just noticed a couple days ago because I was looking for it specifically. But it was an episode that I did in early to mid 2021 with a statistician that was working with Peter McCullough and Robert Malone and some of those other doctors. It's the entire episode is.
Was it Fenton?
His name was oh wow, I'm gonna space on this.
Norm Fenton. It wasn't him. Okay.
No, it was not. It was
It was no, Desmet is not that. He's a
Matthew
psychologist.
Crawford.
Crawford. Yeah. Okay, I know him. Okay.
It was a great episode, but it was the whole, all of it was about how most of what the mainstream media is saying about COVID is bullshit, and I'm surprised it stayed up for as long as it did, honestly, because when it aired, it was a spicy episode and it stayed up. And so I just kind of didn't think anything of it. I even said on my show last week that so far nothing's been taken down from YouTube.
Oh.
And then I went and looked later that
and sure
night,
enough, yeah.
and I was wrong. So
I've had 2 episodes taken down off YouTube.
Oh wow. What were they about?
For medical misinformation, apparently, but it was interesting because one of them, I don't even think I can recreate it now, but there was a very kind of abstract epistemological analogy I was making that ended up just bringing in as examples some discussion about vaccine skepticism or things like that. And even that, sorry guys, if you hear something, it's just a cat. Yeah. But even that, and the thing that got me about it, because I did get the love letters, I saw them. And actually, if you go on to my own blog, which is don'tletitgo.com, you can see I did a whole blog post about it, and I give you the screenshots of the love letter and everything. And they say that your stuff was taken down because it contradicts what the CDC and the WHO or whatever say. So they're telling you that they are doing this in order to conform to the narratives that are being pushed by government agencies. And to me, that's just wrong, Yeah.
I feel like so YouTube with this specifically annoys me because I feel like it's a betrayal on the group of people that made them.
Right.
It was not the normies that were watching Saturday morning cartoons and the nightly news that made YouTube what it was. It was the people who wanted somewhere else to get their information for something. Either education was failing them, so they needed to look up a how-to video on YouTube, or they wanted to listen to Alex Jones in the early days. Whatever it was. The YouTube was built off of people looking for not what they would get from the government.
Sure. And then we know how this went, right? Because when the mainstream media saw that they were starting to lose control of narratives because of these upstarts like YouTube, then all the cronies set their sights on controlling the policies of that platform. Yeah.
Yeah. Very quickly on. And it was fairly downhill from there. But
and that's why BitChute, decided they needed to exist and stuff too, because they saw everything's getting clamped down and there needs to be a place where content is permitted, ideas are permitted to be aired and discussed and challenged. Yep.
And let's hope it's fun. I actually have a few friends to kind of put up a nail in that point of letting people say the wrong things and actually be challenged on it. I have more than one friend that was a borderline Nazi in their late teens and early 20s. Proud Boys and some more sketchy organizations than that, and were on BitChute and some of these other 4chan and some of the other platforms where some of that stuff is allowed to be talked about, and got pulled out of it because people were making sense in the comments more than the person that was making the video that he was watching. And we're finding some of the less objectionable people that were still willing to put their stuff on 4chan or BitChute in the early days. And there's quite a few of them that, like Dave Smith debating Nick Fuentes on BitChute. That debate, I know multiple people that went in there rooting for Nick Fuentes and came out of it going, oh wow, no, Nick's an idiot. Maybe the libertarians actually might have something legitimate to say, and maybe racism isn't the answer here. And so you need those ideas challenged.
It is interesting that we're in the 21st century and we're still having to battle racism, but here we are. Yes.
Right. which is a great pivot to go into the most recent thing on your resume of the Pacific Law Foundation or Legal Foundation.
Yeah.
So tell me about how you got involved with them and what you're doing over there.
So what I sort of did is make a full circle because, as I told you, just before I got involved in social media policy, I had written this amicus brief on this issue of privacy called the third-party doctrine. And do you know what the third-party doctrine is, by the way?
I am vaguely familiar. I was gonna have you go into it earlier, and then we kind of went off. So please explain.
So give my elevator pitch of it. So the third-party doctrine says that if you share something with a third party, which would be social media platform like we were talking about before, could be your bank, telephone company, any of these service providers. This doctrine says that you no longer have a reasonable expectation of privacy in that information that you've shared. And that phrase, reasonable expectation of privacy, comes from this case called Katz. And it became the test as to whether, when the government obtains that information, it is conducting a search within the meaning of the Fourth Amendment. Okay? So what the doctrine then says is you share the information with a third party. The government does not need to get a warrant, no probable cause, no particularized suspicion in order to get that data. And so this is why the FTC can make a consent order with Facebook and have warrantless access to the data. This is why the CBDC, or whatever that acronym, alphabet soup acronym is, of that agency that's supposed to protect you from predatory credit practices or whatever it's supposed to do, that it can suck up all of your credit card records, and then maybe they're going to start looking at your credit card records to see. I mean, I don't know if this was really true, but you remember the stories where they were talking about gun purchases, Bible purchases on your credit cards, and somehow the government could get access to this, and they were maybe going to do some things with it. This is scary, right? Warrantless access to data simply because you are availing yourself of conveniences of the modern financial system, the modern way of communicating. Imagine during COVID, we were all locked down in our houses, and the only way that we can communicate with each other was through Zoom. All of that information shared with a third party, government has warrantless access to it according to this doctrine. There was a little carve out in 2018 in this case called Carpenter. And I don't know if you remember that case, United States versus Carpenter, or I think it was Carpenter v. US. They switch the order sometimes. But in that case, the government said that a certain quantity of cell site location data was enough that it was sort of like the government stalking you. So you did have a reasonable expectation of privacy in a certain quantity of this cell site location data. Okay. So that's where we are with the doctrine now. There's like this tiny little carve out. Otherwise, anything that you share with third party, the government thinks it's entitled to without a warrant. All it has to do is maybe pass a regulation or just give you a subpoena or anything else. Right. And I think that's wrong. I think that, again, I'm not an anarchist. I do think that the government should be able to issue a warrant and get evidence of the crime and then go ahead and prosecute the crime. But that warrant should be based on probable cause and particularized suspicion. Now, in summer of last year, there became apparent a circuit split on an issue of something called geofence warrants. Are you familiar with those?
Vaguely. I know that they exist as a concept, but that's about it.
So the government has been routinely going to Google, and suppose they know that there was a crime committed at a particular location at a particular time. They'll say, well, we would like to know if there were any devices owned by your customers that were in this, sort of geofence, a certain area around this location of the crime within a certain time frame. So it might be a couple hours before or after the crime, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there is a sort of a three-step process where at first they just say, basically, are there, and they don't get very detailed information. And then maybe they themselves can bring some information and cross-reference and then get more specific information, et cetera. But the point is that at the very first instance, all they have is a location and a time frame. So a certain, bubble of a location and a time frame. And they will make Google search, I believe it's over 550 million users or whatever that they have got in their database, something like that.
Yeah.
And obviously, everybody who is being subjected to that search, they do not have probable cause or particularized suspicion about. Google does not apparently, or didn't, at least at the time these searches were conducted, hold the data in a form that narrows down location or time or anything else, so that if they do one of these, they are searching everybody, right? And this is a problem within the Fourth Amendment, right? Is that a search within the meaning of the Fourth Amendment? Probably a geofence warrant does not satisfy the requirements of the Fourth Amendment if it is that. As you might imagine, what the government argues in these cases is that when you decide to share your location with Google in order to avail yourself of certain nice features of the Android device, then you have given up your reasonable expectation of privacy in your location data. And so then, of course, they can obtain it without a warrant. They don't actually need a warrant that satisfies the requirements of the Fourth Amendment. In the Fourth Circuit, that's exactly what the Fourth Circuit held. They agreed with the government on that. In the Fifth Circuit, they shot them down. And so this pair of cases gives rise to a possibility that they're going to go to the Supreme Court and ask this question again, really. When does somebody have a reasonable expectation of privacy in the data that they share with these third parties? And that's what I got very interested in filing a friend of the court brief, and again, the amicus brief about in these cases. And what I ended up doing is I was lucky enough to be paired up with Mark Miller, who's at Pacific Legal Foundation. And we wrote an amicus brief and submitted it in the Fifth Circuit case, because what happened was the government lost, and then they went ahead and appealed for what's called a rehearing en banc, where I think they have 17 active seats on the Fifth Circuit. All 17 judges would rehear the case and decide whether they wanted to agree that the third party doctrine did not apply and that the government needed a warrant. Government didn't like that answer. Government wanted a redo, right?
Yeah.
So they filed that petition for rehearing. We filed an amicus brief arguing that either the petition should be denied, they shouldn't rehear this case, or if they do rehear the case, they should come out the same way on this third party doctrine issue, namely that the third party doctrine does not apply. And what we did in that brief, again, you'd have to go to this Carpenter case if you really want to dig into this issue some more. But Justice Gorsuch, a Trump appointee, so we're going to give Trump his due here, excellent opinion. He wrote a dissent in Carpenter where he, first of all, just questions the value of the reasonable expectation of privacy test at all, because it sounds vague to you, right? It sounds like one of these that's, this balancing test. It actually has a couple prongs. It says, do you have an expectation? And is it an expectation that society is prepared to recognize as reasonable? So imagine that your privacy is at the discretion of what a judge divines society would think is reasonable. That's a little
don't
iffy,
love
right?
that. Yeah.
Don't love that. And not only does Gorsuch not love that, what Carpenter ended up doing in the majority opinion was to add like another balancing test on top of that. And so you just get this miasma of balancing these incommensurable factors. And maybe at the end of it, the judge is going to say that your privacy is worth protecting and maybe not. It is not objective, right? And
Right.
so Gorsuch and some of the other justices have been taking a clue from Scalia, who for a long time before his death, unfortunately he left us, was bringing Fourth Amendment analysis back to something that was based on property rights. Okay. Very concrete, very objective, when you can say, look, there was a property rights violation and that trespass or whatever is tantamount to a search. And so you need a warrant in order to do it, right? Gorsuch was grasping for something like that. And it turns out that in my academic work, I wrote a paper and then I turned it, into this law review article that I published right after Snowden's revelations. He kind of made the topic sexy, right? And I pointed out to something in the history of the third party doctrine that allows you to understand it in terms of the common law of contract. Namely, that the third party doctrine originated in cases where you'd say like a Tony Soprano is making plans with some co-conspirator. He used to do it in The Sopranos in his basement with the laundry machines on so that they couldn't be overheard or whatever, right? So they're planning whatever nefarious thing that they're planning. And part of their agreement, of course, is that they're going to keep it a secret. But suppose the guy turns government informant. That's what they used to call secret agent cases. And the third party doctrine arose in those types of cases. Okay.
Gotcha.
And when I looked at that, I've analyzed privacy for a long time in terms of property and contract rights. Okay. When I looked at it, I immediately realized that the common law would have seen that arrangement between them as an illegal contract, not enforceable.
Right.
So they can promise all day long that they're going to keep their thing a secret, but no court would ever enforce those promises. And so consequently, when the informant violates his promise and turns the information over to the government, there was no reasonable expectation of privacy, of Soprano to, in that, because his contract wasn't enforceable.
Right.
And so that explains it. There are two cases in the 1970s in which the Supreme Court, took this doctrine, this third-party doctrine that had existed for decades in that illegal contract context. That's all it was doing for decades. And then suddenly it brought it into cases in which an individual shared information with the bank or the phone company. These are just service providers, ordinary service provider contracts. And the Supreme Court said, oh yeah, third-party doctrine, we'll just apply it just like we always did. And Gorsuch pointed out in his dissent in Carpenter that there was no justification. Of course, that was something that I also pointed out in my 2014 Law Review article. It's pinned, by the way, if you find me at Amy Peikoff on X. My pin post is always this one because I finally did get to interact with Edward Snowden about it and everything. It was a big deal.
Awesome.
But it's, it's right there. You can read it. And I, go through the history and just say, look, the Supreme Court needed a justification in order to transport this doctrine into cases involving ordinary service provider contracts, perfectly legal contracts, perfectly enforceable contracts in which promises of privacy are made. Those should be respected. And in order to, induce a breach of contract, so to speak, the government should have to have a warrant. That's the solution. It's pretty simple, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I had to do a long explanation in order to bring people with me on it, right? Because it's law, and law gets weird and abstract sometimes. But at bottom, it's a very simple solution. It's saying, look, when people make legal contracts and those contracts contain promises to keep data private, that needs to be respected. In order to invade that, you need a warrant. If this rationale were adopted, all the FISA warrantless stuff would be gone. I mean, the geofence warrants, of course, are out. You have to have a proper warrant.
Yeah, I feel like the same distinction would be easy to tell if you were just talking, remove the government from the situation. If in The Sopranos, the guy turns to a different, mob or whatever, you might kill him, but that's also not super crazy of a thing to have happen. Where if even him, even being a mob boss, if all of a sudden his phone company just started giving out the numbers that he was calling to other phone companies or something like that, so that they could harass him, or it would just be completely unreasonable. It's wild to me. It shouldn't surprise me, but it does kind of surprise me that was such an easy jump for the Supreme Court to make.
Well, I mean, when you go back and you try to do these error theory analyses of stuff like that, right? How is it that they could do this? Nobody, I think, at that time anticipated how much sharing with third parties we would be doing on a daily basis, right? I mean, how many times, if you had to guess today, have you shared information with a third party in order to get some kind of service or anything?
A lot. We're at least 40 to 50 today, because
Probably,
I've been busy.
Yeah.
Just 8 or 9 different social media platforms or video content platforms for this show.
Yeah, and it was Justice Sotomayor, of all people, who, in this 2012 case, United States versus Jones, it was a Scalia written opinion in which Scalia said, hey, if you attach a GPS device to the underside of somebody's car and you use that to track them, the attaching the device is a trespass to chattels. It's, we're looking at this property-based understanding of the Fourth Amendment. It is a search, and you need a warrant for it. You need a valid warrant for it. That was United States versus Jones. Sotomayor wrote in concurrence that she saw implications for this thing called the third party doctrine. And in 2012, I actually didn't know what the third party doctrine was. I thought, okay, I have to go look what this is. And as I said, when I went and looked what it was and understood the origin of it and immediately cashed it out in terms of common law, the solution seemed to become obvious. But Sotomayor herself understood then that we just share so much information with third parties that alone, that change over time, at least raised the question, maybe we should look at this again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I am very thankful that you guys are doing some work to make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, and that's just one of the things, right? So this is the thing that brought me to Pacific Legal, and so now we're working hopefully on another amicus brief that I can talk about when we get it going. It's very exciting. But Pacific Legal has been around for over 50 years, suing the government, originally on property type cases when the government would put unconstitutional conditions on people being able to develop their own property, to build a house on land that they purchased, and the government's coming in and saying, oh, well, we'll let you do that if you give us this easement, this access that the public can use, or if you pay these crazy amounts of money for things that don't even represent the impact of you developing on your land to your neighbors, or anything resembling what you would actually owe other people for a nuisance that you've created or anything else. So those are the types of cases that they started with, but now they do equality and opportunity and also separation of powers cases. There's some policy work that they're doing as well, because sometimes you find that litigation, people are bumping up against statutes that really need to be changed, and so that's an adjunct to the work. But they have been doing all this great work for over 50 years, and yeah, I'm thrilled to join them.
That's awesome. It's funny. There's some leftists out there that's heads would explode to find out that you went from BitChute to somebody that fights for equality and opportunity.
Well, so the equality and opportunity is completely sort of, you'd say colorblind, just completely saying that we are not going to permit government anymore to give, preferences on the basis of race. Really take that seriously, because that's now the law of the land. No
Right.
government agency is supposed to be giving preferential treatment on the basis of race of any kind, even if it's supposedly well-meaning in some way. And so there's that. And then there's other things too, in terms of just creating barriers to people earning a living, through various types of licensing schemes and other ways of keeping people out and favoring the cronies that are already in, etc.
Yeah. Occupational licensing is one of the things that actually brought me into really caring about politics. I was raised passively conservative, and I had a lot of my dad's opinions growing up, but I carried a lot more of his than my mom's, and he's very much the government sucks, but there's not much I can do about it type. And occupational licensing was one of the key issues that I had seen a couple of wins here and there, and people on both the right and the left talking about it, that I thought, this is something that's hurting people on a daily basis, that there are enough people out there that care about it that we might actually be able to change some stuff. Like, this is worth putting in time and effort and energy into trying to fight. And that was like probably 2018, 2017 that I actually got involved with a couple of organizations in New York City, and was organized a few protests and did some things. And when they started arresting people for selling churros in the subway, that was like a huge resurgence of that movement that I was able to be a part of, which was awesome. That happened to happen while I was running for city council in New York, so that was helpful as hell. Thanks to NYPD for your timing on that one. You guys had to have gotten me at least 100 or so votes just on that. But that was like a key issue for me. So
I mean, they're arresting people in some places now for feeding the homeless. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It gets ridiculous. It really does get ridiculous.
Or housing them. I'm the New York State organizer for You Are the Power. And we have been working with a few organizations around the country that are dealing with stuff like that, where homeless shelters trying to get shut down, or food banks and different charities like that. We had one in Clarksburg, West Virginia, that was a very quick win, which was really fun. We just sent our regional organizer down to talk to the city council. They're like, basically said, if you don't stop doing this, Fox News will be at your next city council meeting to interview you on why you're harassing people that are trying to help the homeless and impoverished in your city, instead of helping the homeless and impoverished in your city.
Right.
They very quickly stopped doing that, which was really fun to see. But it's insane to see how much the government actively is hurting people, not just refusing to help and being negligent. And there's the wars and the other things that are going on overseas, and the war on drugs a lot of people know about, but there's so many other things that people are out there trying to help, and they're getting their lives ruined over it instead.
Sure. And then there's talk about licensing requirements for some things, like falconry, for example. Did you know, in order to engage in falconry, to have a license, you have to agree that the government can come and search unannounced, without a warrant, at any time. And every time you renew your license, you have to sign again that you agree that that can happen. So these are the sorts of things that Pacific Legal, is challenging. And that squirrel, Peanut, apparently he died because of one of these crazy, similar types of schemes. They were supposed to have this certain type of license, and then they didn't, and so yeah.
There is no law that the government won't enforce at the end of a gun. That is one of the things that I found out very harshly at a young age, and definitely is one of the things that's made me a libertarian, because you can say a bunch of well-meaning things about just trying to protect people, but if you're really going to end up putting people in harm's way if they don't comply, are you actually helping them? And that was a hard truth that I had to learn as a teen to get here, for sure.
No, it's why that if the government is going to do something, because government is force, as Ron Paul reminded everybody during his campaign so eloquently a lot, there better be a justification, right? And I don't know if we're going to see much steering in the correct direction under Trump. I think in some things we might see some improvements, but he's not fully principled, and I think we're a long way from even my ideal of police, courts, military, and that's it. We're not anywhere close to that, and we're not getting to yours or Malay's ideal anytime soon.
No. I don't. So I am an anarchist, but I also don't want to get there soon, because that kills millions of people. I am very much aware of that. That if we just get rid of it all tomorrow, Rothbard's button kills a lot of people. So I'm hoping we can get there eventually.
You think Malay's doing it right?
I think he's done a lot of good things so far. There's some things that I've questioned that I've seen out of him. There was the thing on creating a basically special task force amongst the federal police to kind of track and possibly punish protesters that may or may not have caused like property damage or harm or something like that. If they blocked streets or transit, they would also be added to the list. But it was really
the blocking street stuff I'm in favor of, though, because that's getting ridiculous, right? People can't even go about their lives, get to work, etc. But yeah, I guess it would depend. The devil's in the details there. How is it implemented? And
if it was our government, that every person at the protest is getting added to that list, whether or not they were actually throwing bricks or in the street or any of those things.
We saw that with January 6th.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I hope that a government under Malay is not going to be as tyrannical and evil as every other government on the country or on the planet right now. But I have my hesitations when I see policies like that come out of people who say that they're, one of us. But there's also an argument to be made that wasn't, he didn't write that policy. He just didn't stop it from happening. So is it actually his fault? There's a lot of those questions about Trump as well. I have mixed feelings on those issues personally. But I do think that there is a reasonable way to get to, close to what you and I might consider an ideal government structure, peacefully and, in the correct order, where, we're not ripping people's welfare out first. We can stop harming people first and then eventually stop helping people because they don't need it anymore, I think is the way to do it, preferably. I know that there's some people that might disagree with me in the comments. But
are you having debates with people about this a lot? I have not read it, but I remember hearing years ago that George Reisman wrote a tome about how you could sort of unravel this whole thing the best way. But I always thought of it as you peel layers off the onion. So last in, first out. Just kind of, because and I don't know if you agree with this, but Rand would always say, controls breed further controls, right? Once you have a certain government intervention, it's going to create inefficiencies that is going, I mean, what was it today? The number that was thrown out in the Senate confirmation hearings for Kennedy was that they have spent nearly $1 trillion in a year on Medicaid. Is that true?
That sounds like a low number.
It was like the 900 billion or whatever, like $1 trillion in a year. And he was saying, well, what do we get for it? And, we have the sickest people on the entire planet, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
But how did it get to that point, right? And it was, they started out with just a little bit in the 1960s or whatever. And then there were some inefficiencies created by that. And so then, of course, they add a little bit more government intervention and a little bit more and a little bit more. And of course, now we're all reeling from Obamacare that was supposed to make our insurance cheaper and you could keep your doctor and all of that. So, I mean, I would just try to go in reverse and repeal. But you think that even, I don't know if that would achieve your goal as well. That you would still leave some of the help in there towards the very end until they didn't need it anymore.
I'm a firm believer that anything that is consensual is consistent with anarchy. And so if we get to a world that I think you would consider ideal, I would then consent to probably what's left, and I would be able to be happy with it. I am ideologically an anarchist. I think that we don't need a centralized government to exist. I think that most of the things that government does, they do very poorly, and we could do better through the free market, through private companies or organizations and nonprofits that could provide those services, whether that's doctors, police, firemen, all of these different things we've seen work on a private model, or more of just a consensual crowdfund model, not a crowdfund at the end of a gun model. So I think that we could get to a place where the government is not necessary. I do not, however, I think that would require a lot of other people being also philosophically anarchist who are not and might never be. And so that's why I am practically a libertarian.
Yeah.
And
so now you're back to human beings have free will, et cetera. And so what would happen is there'd be a dispute between you and somebody who wasn't aligned with you on some issue. And you would have, police station A or police group A that you employed, and he'd have police group B, and then there'd be these wars. And those are the sorts of examples that make me think, okay, a centralized government is not bad if you can limit properly. And of course, we know, because government has proliferated out of control today, that as well-intentioned as our founders were, they put checks and balances in, they had the 3 branches and everything else. It wasn't enough.
Right. We still ended up here.
Yeah, we still ended up here. But perhaps it could be redone, rethought. And I don't know. People like Gorsuch strike me as, they give me hope. And so I really think I'm in the right place, and that we have a chance with some of these very smart judges to do some good and roll some of this back. And a lot of it, of course, is buying time so that you can educate enough people so that you have a principled, educated minority that is motivated to go out and make the changes. You don't even need a majority, right? I think also our founders taught us that in order to do everything that they did, they didn't have to have a majority agree with them necessarily. They were able to start this. Yeah.
3% is the number that I keep hearing.
Wow.
So, yeah, I think that there is definitely hope. And I'm excited to see more of the work that you guys are doing to give me a little bit more of that hope. Before I let you go, tell people where they can find out more about both you and Pacific Legal.
Yeah, so for me, you can see on the screen at Amy Peikoff. That is my handle on X. You can find me there. I have a blog called Don't Let It Go. So it's don'tletitgo.com as well if you want to check that out. That's on the personal side. And for Pacific Legal, it's pacificlegal.org. Just if you haven't been there, you just have to go and see the landing page. And if that doesn't intrigue you to take a look more at what we do, who we are, etc., I don't know what will.
I can concur. It's a great landing page. It's up on
It really is.
my
It's
second
wonderful.
screen at the moment.
Isn't it great?
It is. Guys, you heard her. Go on over, check it out. And then obviously, as always, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this around with everyone that you know that thinks that free speech and government coercion and overreach, free speech is good. Government coercion and overreach is bad. Don't want to combine those two. Definitely share this out because Amy is doing some awesome stuff, and I want as many people to hear about it as possible. And then come on back next week. We'll have another episode, and then I really hope to see everyone next weekend in DC. It is going to be a great time. So get those tickets, LibertyCon.com, promo code FIGHT, and we'll catch you back here next week. Amy, thank you so much for coming on. This was a blast.
Thanks for inviting me.
All right, guys. Until then, keep up the fight.